I'd like to welcome to the stage. We have a solo presentation from Wappier's Alex Moukas.
On the previous presentation, right, let me make sort of 3 comments here, because that was a lot of entrepreneurs sort of around here, so it's important to, this is an important subject, right? So, I've probably, sorry. So I've probably raised maybe $1 billion in my life. Unlike you guys, I'm very old. 3 takeaways. So number 1, when you're raising money, if you're raising from a VC whose model is, hey, I have 20 horses, I'm okay for 15 of them to die, but 5 of them are gonna make me billions, that's not necessarily a great partner for you, the entrepreneur. Because you might be one of the 5 horses, but chances are you're gonna be one of the 15. So make sure that you select your investment partner, your VC, very, very carefully, let's say. That's sort of number 1. Number 2, because as entrepreneurs we're drinking the Kool-Aid, you see a valuation out there that's a complete outlier. You say, hey, this monkey's got, 50 times revenue. I should be getting 50 times revenue. These monkeys might be doing something better than, the rest of us, right? I mean, they are having a high multiple because they're doing something right. A lot of times we look at the highest multiple out there and we say, hey, this should be us. That's seldom the case. So going back to, should I sell now and for what multiple? If you have other ideas, you take the money, you run, you sort of sell your company, you start your next one. So with that, I'm gonna sort of conclude my previous statement and I'm gonna talk about 2001. So this is sort of blockchain, right? This is Web3, this is walled gardens. So something like sort of 20 years ago, right now, you look at, there are probably half a dozen sort of companies out here presenting, they're talking about how they're building the next sort of metaverse. And everybody has a different sort of opinion of what that metaverse is. And obviously, things that work in one metaverse don't work sort of in the other metaverse. So all of this sort of happened maybe 20 years ago when the first carriers came up and they say, hey, you're going to be able to do things just within my ecosystem, my walled garden. Download your ringtones, download your stupid sort of Java games for your basic sort of cell phones, and everything's going to happen here. It took several years for decent technology to come out and essentially start sort of bridging across the carriers to the point where carriers essentially became irrelevant. Well, they always want to not be just the pipes. They eventually became just the pipes. And people that started sort of making money, real money, sort of people sort of across this room. And I remind you that sort of gaming and mobile games sort of fascinating because, 15 years ago, total revenue was what, less than $1 billion? Right now, depending on whose number you're looking at, it's sort of 120, 140. But on a gross profit basis, this industry is quite larger than the automotive industry, which, again, looking around sort of the table is mind-blowing, right? That people like us are making more gross profit margin than, companies like sort of Toyota and Tesla out there. Again, it's mind-blowing. Now, the other sort of interesting point here is that why sort of games and why the on-chain space and why sort of Web3? So interestingly enough, if you look at the different abstraction levels out there, we're looking at sort of a lot of different metaverses. There's going to be some sort of interoperability. I mean, we're already talking to brands that want to sell you outfits that you can wear at any of half a dozen metaverses at any given time. So you're talking about sort of utility NFTs, but only at one of them at any given time. So you cannot have, obviously, because you're a single person, right? You cannot have sort of 2 avatars at the same time wearing that, let's say, Gucci outfit in more than one metaverse. But as you're switching metaverses, you need to be able to sort of wear that and maybe 9 months later go and buy and pick up the actual sort of item. So one of the sort of interesting sort of elements, let's say, of games and the on-chain space is that in our mind and the way we're talking sort of different sort of global brands out there, it looks like there's going to be a material inflow of dollars, brand dollars, advertising dollars into the gaming space and into the on-chain gaming space. I mean, one might argue, couldn't they make that sort of off-chain as well? The answer is sort of probably yes, but hey, NFTs are cool, so we might as well ride the wave. Now, a couple of other sort of interesting things. One is a lot of people are saying, hey, I have this sort of amazing sort of game, I'm gonna retrofit it with NFTs. How would that work? How do I design an economy that makes sense? Especially an economy where in-app purchases sort of are combined with NFTs. And that's a sort of a non-trivial task. I mean, we're looking at some sort of basic NFT models that are, let's call them sort of comically simplistic in terms of play to earn. If you look at a world where NFTs coexist with in-app purchases, the environment and the world is much more complex. So essentially you have to design an economy where you need to balance sort of in-app purchase revenue and NFT revenue. Somebody might say, hey, I'm gonna sell this bottle as an in-app purchase. I'm gonna sell a bottle with twice the capacity as an NFT, and I'm gonna charge 3 times the amount of money. And that's obviously suicidal because an NFT is there forever, especially utility NFTs. When that user sort of churns, they're gonna dump that back into the marketplace, and that's gonna kill future in-app purchase revenue. So it's very important to sort of design sort of a universe where in-app purchases and NFTs coexist and be able to build that long-term economy in a way that makes sense. Because there are a lot of folks out there that are going for the quick buck, right? Saying, hey, let me do a drop right now, and I'm gonna build an amazing game that might come in 9 months or 18 months, and you're gonna be able to use these sort of utility NFTs at that point. This almost looks like an ICO, right? And because a lot of people in the audience are sort of, established sort of entities in the gaming space with a reputation, they cannot necessarily afford to do that. So in our mind, building a long-term economy and optimizing revenue for the long term is sort of much more important than making a few quick, let's call it million, at the initial drop of the NFTs as these items are essentially sort of built out. The other thing that's important, and this is an area where I don't envy our customers at all, is that, I mean, we at wappier, we're a technology company, right? We're providing infrastructure, we're providing the right plumbing, working across all of the chains out there to accelerate people's sort of Web3 strategy. The typical gaming company out there, though, they have to select a chain. They have to make sort of pick a horse and, well, hopefully stick with that horse for a while. The problem is that if you look at the market out there, it's so, let me show you this slide, sort of, these are the chains we currently support. I really don't envy our customers that have to pick a chain right now. Because if you were to ask me, where do you, on pain of death, where do you put your money right now? What's the right chain? Sort of 6 months ago, I would have given a different answer than 4 months ago, than 2 months ago, than today. The market changes so quickly, which means that when someone designs a game in terms of infrastructure, it's more important to have a plan B in terms of how to take the assets out of the chain they're going to be investing in now. So let's say they pick chain X, right? It's very important at design level, right, to have a plan B on how these assets can move to another chain, because that might not be the right chain 2 years from now. And again, we go back to the point, which is an NFT is not an in-app purchase, right? An NFT is there forever, and you need to be able to support a cross-chain sort of universe. You need to be able to sort of move assets across different chains. You need to be able to change the smart contracts over time, because designing something today doesn't mean that you can predict the future sort of 2 years from now. So the smart contract need to be sort of, let's call it sort of changeable. Yes, let me talk sort of briefly about what we do as a company. I mean, we are providing plumbing. We are providing acceleration in terms of technology. Our customers are folks that typically say, let me go back to, let's see, our customers somewhere. Okay, so our customers are a lot of the big guys out there, right? Obviously, all of these folks have sort of, hundreds of people building stuff. However, we only focus on building, sort of optimizing revenue, optimizing NFTs, pricing, optimizing our purchase pricing, and as importantly, building enterprise software that helps our customers, the global publishers, to retrofit existing games with NFTs and launch NFT first games. What that means is that we have sort of 125 people. Well, out of the 125 people, we have 110 people essentially writing code and building world-class sort of infrastructure to make things sort of quicker. And we're doubling in size in terms of at least headcount this year, more than quadrupling in revenue. Why am I mentioning this? Because it's the problems we're trying to solve and the problems that need to be solved in the long run are sort of require serious technology. So when you go from doing once-off things, hey, I'm going to do an initial NFT drop and then maybe build a game, to making, let's say, Web3 a core part of the ongoing infrastructure and operationalizing sort of Web3, this is when people start to need technology. I mean, because I'm old, I remember a time when you needed to have sort of software engineers to put up a single banner ad. And click-through rates were 7%, by the way. This is 1996. So in a similar way, it's one thing to do once-off things. It's another thing to say, hey, this needs to work across half a dozen games, need to work all the time without adding dozens of people in NFT live ops in the same way we have been adding sort of dozens of people in live ops on a per game basis. So what that means in terms of functionality, you know, it has to work cross-chain, right? So pick a chain. It has to be, well, fully customizable. It has to be able to manage live ops, like for instance, automatically download from the different, from let's say Unreal or Unity, the assets. Distribute them to 100 creators, the 3D meshes. Allow the creators to add skins on that. Re-import them back, pre-approve the creators, and then do a DAO voting on the 10 NFTs out of the 100 designs that need to be minted. And then for each design, maybe mint 1,000 NFTs. And operationalize that, right? That is sort of software. You don't need an army of people to do what I just described. Then sort of gamification is sort of critical and important, which is sort of the second element. And the other most important thing in our minds is sort of blockchain oracles and sort of smart contracts. Why? Because blockchain oracles gives you the ability to process gaming events and essentially automatically process them into NFTs. So for instance, you're only minting an NFT, a collectible NFT, to the first person that killed a dragon in its country in your game. And how do you get that information? Through a blockchain oracle that validates event. And then a contract gets sort of executed, the NFT gets minted, and well, we're off to the races. How do you sort of validate different sort of smart contracts across a lot of different chains, which is as important? If a chain is EVM compatible, then it's easy. If it's not, and there are a lot of sort of pretty decent or actually very good chains that are not EVM compatible, you need the same smart contracts to work across the different chains and being proven to work, and they need to be audited. So again, that's a non-trivial task. Now, on the automate NFT ops that I mentioned before, it's the auto asset import from the gaming engines, NFT catalog management. You can only do so many things by hand. You need to be able to sort of manage hundreds of thousands of SKUs in terms of potential NFTs at the same time, sort of price them. Token economy optimization. So a lot of people are optimizing for the initial drop. That doesn't make sense. We have many, many levers here. It's not just sort of price. You have sort of initial minting fees. You have smart contracts and the royalties that go back to the publisher. You might have primary marketplace sales revenue. You might have secondary marketplace sales revenue. So pricing NFTs is more of an art right now. Most of the pricing is a bit, how do I put this, sort of haphazard, and the optimization is for the initial money that comes in, right? Hey, I'm going to do a sort of a private sale. I'm going to sort of whitelist, and I will give you loot boxes with delayed sort of reveal. All of that doesn't sound like long-term optimization of the economy. It sounds like take the money and run. And there is a lot of that going on right now. In our mind, this is not sustainable. So I think 22 is going to be an interesting year because I think a lot of, let's say, the hype is going to give way to sort of more pragmatic approach. That's also a more long-term approach in terms of what what we're trying to achieve here. Also, I remind you, I mean, if you look at the engagement tools, the automated airdrops, and the way things happen, I remind you that there's so many people out there that are really, really familiar with buying things off the stores. And it's a tiny minority in terms of the people that own crypto wallets and do things. So in our minds, there needs to be a store compliant way to buy NFTs without forcing people through a Web3 KYC workflow where you have to buy cryptocurrency. So if you look at our technology, you can go and mint at any chain you want, sort of your tokens. You can buy tokens through the store. Then you can go and mint the NFT sort of on-chain and use the tokens to buy NFTs without necessarily having to drive people to Web3 sort of workflow. There are a lot of folks out there, and a big part of the crypto community is almost militant sometimes. Hey, we're going to bring down the stores. I think reality is much more, let's call it nuanced. And there's so many consumers that are really sort of familiar with the store workflows. It makes a lot of sense to cater to them and offer them some sort of NFT exposure without necessarily pushing them into a Web3 sort of workflow. Now, going back, and I think the previous panel was also interesting because it talked about what is the right timing, right? What do you do when there's a correction? How much do you invest? People's perception of reality is a funny thing. So it was probably 15 years ago, 2007 and 8. There's a big sort of advertising festival called Cannes Lion, and it happens at Cannes in the summer, and that's the advertising festival. So there was a panel there, and it was three of us, sort of the moderator, me being the mobile guy, and the CEO of Second Life was there. You guys, how many of you remember Second Life? Okay, that's not bad, that's not bad. I was just talking to a guy that built the first agency on Second Life, and he's doing wonders right now. So I asked the question to the audience, how many of you, and the audience is sort of CMOs, right? CMOs of global companies. How many of you think what's going to be bigger in 5 years? And that's probably 2007, 6, 7. Mobile or Second Life? Believe it or not, 80% of the CMOs, these are sort of global CMOs, right? They said Second Life, which is sort of mind-blowing. I mean, it reminds you that there were electric cars running in the street of New York in 1902. However, having something, a single data point sort of happen and then sort of commercialize that sort of single thing where it's sort of to the point where you have mass adoption, these are two very, very different things, right? So in retrospect, I think the CMOs were right because in a maybe 25-year horizon, as opposed to 5 years, I think that Web3 is going to transform the world in bigger ways than, let's say, mobile transformed the world, which is shocking because mobile was pretty freaking transformative. And the reason that's going to happen is because of smart contracts, right? Because for the first time since the beginning of history, us humans usually transacted based on natural language, right? Either in terms of a verbal contract or in terms of a written contract, right? Smart contracts, though, is the first time we're using sort of computer code, and that's quite interesting for a few different reasons. Number one, smart contracts get automatically executed when blockchain Oracle conditions are there. You know, you will only pay an incremental insure. I'm sorry, am I moving too much? Are you sure? Sorry, man. It's the cameraman. So I'm going to execute this blockchain Oracle only if, let's say, X number of your employees are not are speeding, and then you're paying an extra premium. So you have sort of conditions that are pre-approved. Then you have computer code that gets executed. That's not really, it's indisputable. You don't need lawyers to say, hey, what I really meant to say in this paragraph was X or Y. You know exactly what the computer code is going to do when it gets executed. And is irreversible. So there's no arbitration, there's no legal system, there's no jurisdiction, as I was recently trying to explain to my general counsel. So I think the world is going to change sort of profoundly. I think that the amount of money that's going to come into gaming, because gaming is essentially sort of starts to power all of these virtual worlds in terms of real economy money coming into the virtual world, is going to be unprecedented. I mean, it's going to take a while, and all entrepreneurs, you know, we're drinking the Kool-Aid, so it's an exponential curve, right? It typically takes longer. People underestimate how long it's going to take, but they also underestimate how big it's going to be. So I think we're sitting at a very, very interesting sort of point in history where the rate of change is going to dramatically increase. So I think that's it, guys. And I have, well, 0 seconds to spare, but